True Digital Media Consulting. You're online right now and so are your customers, but marketing has to be a consistent journey. True Digital Media Consulting can help with your online ads, organic growth, and so much more. Contact us today at 832-934-4436 or visit our website at truedigitalmediaconsulting.com.
Looking to advertise? Join the Sphere's vast demographic reach of thousands of people all over the world. Send an email today to advertise@thesphere.tv or call us at area code 832-772-7789. KOG and Company. Are your unique gifts and talents changing the world? Do you desire to belong to a community of unity? Visit KOGpassion.com to learn more about the Unleash Your Dopeness movement.
Welcome back to the Docs. We're excited, as always, to have you back. Of course, our goal and purpose here is to educate, empower, and inspire you. Got a special show to kind of round out the year. Merry Christmas to you all in advance, and Happy New Year. We're kind of doing this. Last show is going to be another feature about a black man in medicine, and it's somebody who's very near and dear to my heart. You guys will find out about this person here in just a second. First of all, sort of going to get right into things with our hot topic. And hot topic for this week, for the day, is Surgeon General recently issued a new warning about and really declared an epidemic regarding use and increase in the use of vaping and e-cigarettes. So I think vaping is something that has become sort of more popular as a way to minimize nicotine intake and nicotine exposure. However, the Surgeon General has now declared it an epidemic, especially for teens. So for those of you who have teens out there that may be exposed to that or may have peer pressure to engage in those activities, know now that there is it's declared an epidemic, and there's lots of information on CNN had a nice article about it, and then of course on the Surgeon General website and the CDC website. So that's kind of the hot topic, hot bit for the day. Moving right along, sort of, I alluded to this special guest and who we have in here today to talk about and sort of have another conversation about what it's like to be a black man in medicine, and it's none other than my very own brother, like literal blood brother, Dr. Earl Osuagwu. So I'm going to toss it over to him to introduce himself a little bit and tell you about him, and then we'll kind of get right into things.
Good evening. As he said, I guess a semi-special guest in my mind, but
very
happy
special
to be here and participate on an off day for me. I'm 37, working here in Houston at Memorial Hermann Hospital for Team Health and Internal Medicine. Did my residency here with UT and been in Houston since from 2009 up until this point. Been in Houston.
Awesome. And go ahead and if you want, go ahead and shout out your Instagram handle, whatever, so people can see you, follow you.
Sure.
On there.
Not really active, but if you want to take a look, not too much happening. But Instagram is Doc Echo. That's DOCECO_MD. On Instagram, not really on Twitter. Facebook is my name, Earl Osuagwu, EARL. Osuagwu, OSUAGWU.
Awesome. Like I said, I'm real excited about this, and I'll be perfectly honest. I had hit my brother up to see if he would be open and free, number one, because he's busy as most of us are, to do this, and I was very pleasantly surprised that he was down for it. He's been a big role model and encouragement to me, and so this is as much a treat for me as it is going to be hopefully for you guys. So we have sort of had this show before where we have talked to different men in different fields of medicine. We actually had one of his friends from medical school on a couple of months ago, a friend of mine who was at a different medical school than I was, but around the same time. And really the goal and the idea behind it is just to sort of have a conversation, and number one, identify the fact that there is a decline in the number of black men in medicine. try to sort of tease out why we think that is, and then really just to have an open and honest conversation about what our individual experiences have been, both in medical school and training and now beyond. So again, sort of like we did last time, just sort of going by the numbers. The AAMC and other organizations do a really great job in terms of keeping statistics and exact numbers on these things. And I like to sort of be driven by numbers and data. So back in 1978, the number of black male applicants was just over 1,410. And then several years later, almost 40 years later, in 2014, that number had actually gone down to just under 1,400, 1,337. Taking it a step further, those who matriculated, so those who applied and then actually went on to gain admission and go in 1978 was 542. And then again, some almost 40 years later in 2014, it had declined to 515. So just sort of off the bat to sort of open up the discussion, he and I have sort of talked about this, not necessarily in this setting. In your mind, man, what do you think are some of the potential contributing factors as to why over 40 years that number has essentially stayed the same or even gone down a little bit?
I guess for me it would be, starting at the lower levels. Nobody just wakes up and says, oh, I want to go to medical school. But it has to start from those times when somebody's in their quote-unquote formative years, whether that's elementary, junior high, high school. For most people, by the time they get into their latter years of college, they've already established kind of where their potential career may head. So it's important to identify those students who might be talented enough or have not necessarily talented at that point, but maybe have the mindset or the drive or the idea potentially joining medicine. I think that's where most of the failures have occurred. Is at the lower levels, those particularly at the junior high into early high school level. So identifying the students who may excel in STEM fields, even if it's not necessarily the biological sciences, but mathematical sciences, those type of students who might be capable of, getting into med school and performing in med school and then being future leaders in medicine.
Yeah, I think that's key, and just that sort of makes me think to ask another question that I don't know that I've ever asked you. When did you know or decide that you wanted to become a physician or to pursue medicine?
I think for me it's difficult to say when did I know. I always, I guess, kind of tailored my educational ideas in terms of the sciences. I was always really good at math. Really good at drawing. I thought I was going to be an architect.
Yeah.
And given my background, being Nigerian, those who are African in general will know that the families tend to push you into professional fields, whether it's engineering, doctoring, nursing, lawyering, etc. And I actually went to undergrad for engineering, graduated with an electrical engineering degree. Wasn't satisfied, I don't think, with that degree. And also at the time, it was probably God's divine planning. At the time that I graduated, the job market was kind of on a downtrend. A lot of layoffs, very few hires. So the question for me was, do I attempt to go to grad school for engineering or do I go to a different path? And medicine had always been, in my mind, an option. And at that point, for me, having gone through the rigors of an engineering degree and a lot of the overlapping courses that were required of me, medicine at that point made the most sense.
Yeah, I think that's I think it's really interesting as well that you sort of bring up the maybe not the straightest path, like you didn't necessarily always know. And it's interesting to hear your response now after obviously having known you my whole life, because I feel like for me it was similar but different, where I sort of just tended to gravitate towards the sciences, did relatively well in them, and sort of never really thought about doing anything else besides medicine. And so it's interesting to hear your perspective on the importance of trying to identify those students who may be excelling and then may, be tailored for something like that, and then also your personal sort of route to get you to where you are.
Yeah, and then even interrupt that, not necessarily the students that are excelling, it could be the students that are interested, because the students who are excelling may not always lean towards those fields. So if they're not driven towards that, no matter how good they are, it may not work out for them. But if you can identify the students, not necessarily who just excel, but those who are interested or show, delineation towards that, then I think that's the most important thing.
Yeah, I think that's key. And I want to talk about something sort of piggybacking off that. Before we do that, definitely want to shout out our sponsors, everybody who's making it possible for us to be here. This particular portion of the episode is sponsored by True Digital. You're online right now, and so are your customers. The question is, how do you actively reach them? Marketing has to be a consistent journey, and we're here to walk with you every step of the way. True Digital Media Consulting can help with website development, online ads, your business reputation, and organic growth on search engines. Give us a call today to discuss a customized strategy for your business at 832-934-4436 or send us an email to info@truedigitalmediaconsulting.com. Mention the Sphere to receive a free 30-minute strategy consultation. Appreciate you, True Digital, for coming through and helping sponsor this particular portion of the show. So yeah, I think that you bring up such a key point, and one of the articles that was cited in this document by the AAMC basically showed that there were a couple of, in addition to many other things, but a couple of things that were very key as to why, or what they identified as potential factors for why, young African American men weren't pursuing medicine, and those things were basically just a lack of knowledge about the pathway, how to do it, what it looks like. Poor access to role models, so not seeing people that looked like them choosing those paths. Obviously, the financial cost of education, college, and medical school and beyond, and then just the actual educational rigor itself that this particular pathway sort of requires of you. And that sort of leads into the next question or discussion topic. Sort of along your path and journey, whether it was in college or medical school or whatever, what, if any, challenges did you face during that process, and how did you sort of work through that?
Sure. So I guess biggest challenges were, number one, identifying, do I want to do this? That's the first challenge when you're in a degree field that's not necessarily polar opposite, but outside of the typical biological sciences type degree that most medical students achieve. That was number one, deciding, do I want to go back to school to do all the other courses that I need to do to get into medical school, number one. Number two was, now I need to refocus my mind from an engineering mindset to, how do I get into medical school? What are the steps to get into medical school? I need to take the MCAT. I need to apply to all these schools, and not something I anticipated when I first entered undergrad, in the fall of '99. I think those would be the two biggest educational, roadblocks. Secondary to that would be, looking for people who look like me, who could kind of guide me on the path.
Right.
Didn't have too much experience with doctors. I had a second cousin, my mom's cousin, who I knew was in medicine, particularly in the field I'm in now, Dr. Chiagazia Wansaruba, who I could always go to discuss medicine, and that, I think, kind of helped. And then other than that, the biggest thing was, where can I get in? Because it's not just a matter of wanting to go, it's a matter of finding, where can I fit in?
Right.
Do I want to stay in Texas? Do I limit myself to Texas, where I'm from? Do I look, nationally? Do I look even internationally with, some of the schools that people go to in the Caribbean?
Sure.
I think those are the biggest things. Number one, do I want to do this based on where I am? Number two, can I do this in terms of taking the courses that I need to do? And number three, where can I do this? Those are the biggest questions I had to answer for myself.
Yeah. And if you don't mind, I want you to sort of speak to having to go back after college,
that was a
before
difficult
medical school,
Definitely.
to take all these extra classes that were required of you, because
Exactly.
that's different than just going in and being a pre-med major and having this
And going straight
sort
through.
of straight line. Talk to us about that a little bit.
Yeah, so when I graduated undergrad, I went to undergrad from 99 to 03. And again, reflecting back on what I said earlier, the engineering field was a bit of a downturn at that time. So finding employment was difficult. So the question I had was, do I find employment somewhere outside of engineering just to keep myself afloat? Do I consider medicine, which was a big possibility, in which case I would need to go back to school? So when I finally made the decision to, follow the path of medicine, I had to basically look at what courses I had taken, what courses were required, and now how do I go about doing that. So I ended up, and a lot of kids do this nowadays, I ended up back at my parents' place, living with my parents for 2 years,
Yep.
taking the courses that I had left, particularly organic chemistry, anatomy, a few hours I had left that would basically allow me entry into medical school.
Yeah.
I ended up working for a physician at the age of even 19, 20, before I finished medical school, before I finished undergrad, but even after, to give me a little bit more exposure, a bit more, I guess, if you will, place where I can learn. So it was a process of going back to home for 2 years, living at home, feeling like I'm taking a step back or a pause in my career before I actually was able to get a medical school in 2005, 2 years after I finished my undergraduate education.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. And I got another question for you that I've never asked you that you sort of triggered to me. But Facebook Live people, thank you for tuning in. If you want to hear the rest of this, which I think you really do, you're going to have to tune into the rest of the podcast. Facebook Live, we ask that you subscribe to our show on all the major platforms, including iTunes, SoundCloud, Google Play, and Stitcher. Review our show on iTunes with constructive feedback. Please share this Facebook Live post and the entire show with your family and friends. And if you do feel so inclined, we're always willing to take donations. So donate to our mission to bring enriched and inspiring content each and every week. You can donate at this www.thesphere.tv/donate. And then lastly, and especially for the month of December, the Sphere has decided to help support the Hungerthon initiative to help end hunger in America and around the globe. So we're coming to the tail end of the month here. So please go to www.thesphere.tv/hungerthon, HUNGERTHON, to donate today. So thanks for tuning in on Facebook Live. Check out the rest of it on the rest of the podcast. I don't think I've ever asked you or that we've talked about what it took from a mental standpoint to be like, yo, I'm going back home, and this isn't like I'm just home for a few months until I find a job. Like this is sort of slightly putting roots back down so I can then sprout and go somewhere else.
Yeah.
Talk to me about that, because, I mean, you know my story. I went back home too, but for a much shorter time. Talk to me about what it took to get there and then your time back home and what you learned from
Sure. I think it's probably overestimated what it took to me. In my mind, it wasn't that much. I was just 4 years removed from, obviously living at home up until age 17, getting into college. My initial plan, when I finally made the decision, you know what, I need to take other courses, get into medical school. My hope was to, get some sort of job. I don't bagging groceries. I don't care, whatever it was.
Yeah.
In the DFW area where I still had friends, so I could enjoy being, relatively independent, until the time it took to get into medical school. And when that didn't work out, and the best option that I found was to, go back home, work for a doctor locally that my parents knew, live at home, basically, obviously rent free, food free, everything free, so that I could focus. Then that mindset had to be shifted from independence to some sort of dependence on my parents to kind of help, financially, emotionally, spiritually at that point, which they had always done, from high school, even at the time that I left to go to undergrad. But once I got settled in, and, it was basically being like an only child, because you were gone, our sister was gone. So it was basically me and my parents. So in some respects, it was a little bit difficult, knowing how they are. A little semi-helicopter parents, being the only child at home. It was a little bit of an adjustment, but I think once I got through, I think that was the support I needed to be able to be successful in my classes, to, study for the MCAT, and eventually be successful to get into medical school.
Yeah. I think even now, I think you're downplaying how big it is to be able to shift and do that, because I know for me, when I finished college, and I've shared this before, I didn't get into med school right away. And when I finished, and when I was like, all right, well, I guess I got to move back home until I can figure out what the next step was, that was like not this like earth-shattering thing, but it was a big sort of like, man, like all my friends are going out and getting their first jobs and moving to new cities, or going to graduate school, medical school, law school, whatever. And here I am moving back home. So to me, it was a bit of a bigger step back, and maybe I built that up to be something bigger than it actually was. But I think it's key, and I love the way you sort of and that's as your MO, just sort of that's just what you had to do.
Exactly.
To sort of get ready and get things together to make that next step to where you were going to eventually end up.
Yeah. And for me, regardless of, whatever it is in life, and there are these small times in life, and, God willing, you live long enough to be 80, 90 years old.
Right.
Those time periods, whether it's 6 months, 12 months, a year and a half, 2 years, whatever, is a very small portion, of your life.
Yeah.
In terms of the time investment. You have to see it as an investment for what could be for the future. So when you take that perspective, then life should be not easy, but you kind of take things as they come.
Yeah. I think that's a good life lesson, not just for medicine, but life in general. You mentioned our, cousin, really, in our culture, uncle, as a role model and mentor. Once you then got into medical school, how did you go about identifying mentors, or then what role did mentors play moving forward in your career?
Sure. So I think in terms of mentorship, our mother has a, medical background. In the African culture, there's a lot of, medically inclined people. So in terms of, mentorship, I didn't necessarily seek mentorship.
Sure.
I think one thing that was important for me in terms of kind of preliminary mentorship was working with, Dr. Peter DeVette, a family medicine physician in Tyler, Texas. I kind of shadowed him for a couple of years while I prepped, with my courses to get into medical school. So I think that was the important mentorship for me.
Right.
Preliminarily before I actually got into medical school. Once I actually got into medical school, it was less so of having a formal mentor and more so knowing who I could reach out to, whether that's our cousin, whether Dr. DeVette again, whether other people my mother knew with her medical background, or people locally to me at Howard University, where I went to med school in Washington to reach out to. I think mentorship for me, I think, was less of an important thing, but I see the benefit for other people.
Yeah.
Who may need that. I'm more of an introverted, do it by yourself, pull yourself up by the bootstraps type person.
Yep.
But mentorship is certainly an important thing for a lot of people who may seek things outside of themselves, whether it's medicine, whether it's life in general.
Yeah, I think that's good, and I think you sort of took the words out of my mouth, that you are and have been very self-driven, like most people are, but it's exceptionally so, and introverted. But and so I'll sort of share my my take on that. But I definitely got to shout out our next sponsor, which is none other than the Sphere. Are you starting your business and looking for a place to advertise? Do you have a need to reach out to thousands of people across the world to build your brand or sell your product? If so, get your product placement and advertising needs handled right here at the Sphere. We offer a wide variety of content delivery platforms, including iTunes, Google Play, SoundCloud, YouTube, and Stitcher. Plus, we have a vast demographic reach within the United States, as well as modern countries across the globe. Our enriched content and inspiring dialogue, coupled with your strategic ad, is surely to hit the mark every time. Call us today at area code 832-772-7789, or send an email over to advertise@thesphere.tv. Sort of piggybacking off of that last thought, I mean, for me, and I've always wondered, and again, this is sort of a treat for me to have an opportunity to sort of sit and
of course,
pick your brain a little bit. But I've always wondered, like, man, like how did you like do it? Because there wasn't necessarily anybody directly in front of us that you could look to and point to and be like, all right, yo, he did it, I can do it. And then on top of that, you sort of swept it under the rug, that you picked up and moved your life from Texas out to the East Coast in D.C. and didn't really know anybody out there, had a few family members, but essentially we're starting all over.
Exactly.
And starting the beginning of this new career and meeting new people. So sort of walk us through, I guess for me, my question is, walk me through that first few weeks, few months where you're like, all right, I'm in a new place and I'm in medical school. Like, what am I doing here now? Like, how do I get through this?
I think, well, every step you take in life is a process, whether that's you're going from, elementary to junior high to high school to college, etc. So it's a matter of not necessarily do you want to adjust, you have to. So when you take that perspective, it's not a matter of do I want to do this, it's a matter of I have to do this.
Yeah.
So that kind of pushed me along, I think, in terms of getting into med school. So I guess jumping backwards a little bit, when I did apply for med school, I applied basically to all the schools in Texas. My initial goal was to just try and stay in Texas, stay close to home.
Yeah.
And then since we had family in D.C., Howard's a great, historically backed college. So my dad encouraged me to apply there, which I did. Initially, I was waitlisted for a few schools in Texas and was planning to do a post-baccalaureate program for a year until I heard word from Howard that they were ready to accept me. So, of course, I dropped everything and got myself prepped to do a move from Texas to another state, keeping in mind for 21 years, or actually at this point, I was 23.
Mm-hmm.
I'd never lived anywhere but Texas. So, as you said, that was going to be an adjustment geographically. Not just educationally, but we did have some family there, thankfully, who were able to help me settle in, and kind of harping back to what I said about having to be ready for anything that comes your way.
Mm-hmm.
If that's what you want, it's not a matter of needing to or wanting to be ready. You need to be ready. You have to be ready.
Yeah.
So thankfully, my dad moved with me. He flew up with me, got me into, a decent apartment. My uncle was there, our cousin. So I think having them initially, that first few weeks before I started school, was the most helpful thing, just to get settled in.
Yeah.
Sometimes the hardest thing about change in life is just location changes, physical change. It can be a job. You may know what you're doing, but when you change locations, trying to adjust to the culture of that environment can be the most difficult thing, and less so the job or for me at that time, the education part of it. So I guess having family there was important, knowing that our parents are very, very involved, and being able to reach out to them, for spiritual, even financial support was an important thing for me. But once again, going back to the fact that, when change comes in life, you kind of have to roll with it. And for me, staying faithful and trusting in God for my path was an important part as well.
Yeah, that's dope.
If not the most important part.
Yeah, I think 100%. And I mean, I know that obviously because, you're my brother and I know you very well. But I mean, for me, like, watching you dedicate yourself and take the steps to take those prereqs and spend a lot of time back at home by yourself with mom and dad. And
speaking on that, sorry to interrupt you again, but that also made it easier. Not that being at home was terrible, but after 2 years of living with your parents, basically as an only child,
ready to go.
I was ready to leave. So being somewhere else, independent again, at that early 20s age, I was ready. So actually being in a new environment was actually refreshing.
Yeah. So I mean, I agree with that, and I think for me as a little brother at that time, I was 17-ish, 16, 17 years old, and man, I was proud to be like, yo, I got a brother who is in medical school, and knowing that I already was sort of geared towards that, I feel like for me, it did a lot for me to be like, all right, like, yo, he's on the path now, and this is sort of blazing the trail for me. We're going to take one last second to shout out our third sponsor. We appreciate you as always. This particular portion of the show is sponsored by KOG and Company. Are your unique gifts and talents changing the world? Unleash Your Dopeness is a people empowerment movement built to encourage the masses to operate outside of their fears and have the gall to recklessly pursue their dreams and passions in life. Join thousands of others as we unlock the greatness that dwells inside. Shop dope gear at kogpassion.com. That's kogpassion.com. And use coupon code DOPE for 10% off exclusive Unleash Your Dopeness apparel. Act now. Sizes are selling out fast. So sort of, we've talked about this before as well, but I want you to walk me through a difficult encounter, whether it was in residency or post-residency, whether it was with a patient, a coworker, what have you, colleagues, and how you deal with that and continue to push through in spite of that.
Sure. So, it's probably been, everybody deals with small things, every doctor, whatever your age, gender, race, religion, there's always difficult circumstances, whether it's with the administration above you, whether it's a patient, whether it's another staff member. I guess one I could point to, it's easy to jump to the racial side of things, but I think being black in medicine, that's the most natural. experience that we have. This is during residency at with UT Houston when I was doing a rotation at Lyndon B. Johnson General Hospital here in Houston. Did have one patient who was quite abusive, not directly to me, but to our nursing staff. And anybody who knows nursing, particularly in the county, they know there's a lot of foreign nurses, be it African, be it Asian, be it whoever. But he was being very verbally abusive and calling some of our African nurses niggers. And so I had to step in, and he kind of took the same tone with me. And we had to call security and basically have the gentleman escorted from the hospital. And this is a situation in which thankfully he medically was stable enough to leave. Otherwise, we would likely be required to keep him in the hospital to continue his medical care. But I've had certain other circumstances with patients who were, whether physically or verbally abusive, particularly when it comes to racial things, and having to basically take care of them or find another doctor to take care of them, due to their tone or their behavior. So that's the biggest thing I would say I would encounter. Not as blatantly currently with where I currently am, but certainly in residency in the county and other locations. That's probably the biggest thing I face. And it may not be necessarily directly racial, but you do encounter biases from other, sides of people, whether it's staff or patients, other hospital workers, until they realize you're a doctor, then the tone changes. So
Yeah.
I would say that's the biggest thing for me is, realizing who I am, but other people outside of me not necessarily respecting that until they see my medical badge.
Yeah, and I think I think we've all, like you said, experienced that, and the important thing to remember is that at least for me, I remind myself I didn't get here by accident.
Exactly.
You know what I'm saying? Like, I worked just as hard as everybody else. I took the same exams everybody else took.
And in some cases harder.
In some cases harder, and I'm held to the same standard that everybody else is held to.
Higher standard.
So yeah, I think, and then obviously, like you said and alluded to, I think the main thing is to realize that our goal is to deliver the best patient care we can possible.
Correct.
And in spite of what may come our way in doing that. Sort of going along with the theme and why I wanted to bring you on, like, we identified that one of the things and one of the reasons why there's such a decline in the numbers of young black men in medicine is they just don't see people who look like them. So I know it's challenging based on the type of work you do, but what do you see moving forward in terms of things like this or other things that need to be done to sort of help that be something that's more of the norm for young students who are interested in pursuing that?
Yeah, again, I guess kind of going back to the first question of the night is, I think it starts with the young people. I mean, it has to start when I say young, I mean the youngest of the young, even going down to the elementary level. There's obviously this program. I shout out one of my classmates, or he was a year ahead of me from medical school, Max Madhir, an anesthesiologist
Pulse of Perseverance.
with Pulse of Perseverance.
Yep.
All the work he and two of his friends are doing with, outreach scholarship programs. I think familiar faces is an important thing. If you can identify with something, you can put yourself in that particular person's shoes.
Yeah.
So for most of our young black youth, particularly our black males, what is the way that they see themselves perceived in society is not as doctors, it's not as lawyers, it's not as leaders, it's not as anything but, the downtrodden, thugs,
right.
Aggressive, uneducated. And
Right.
so that, that prejudice kind of precipitates itself. If that's all you see of yourself, that's basically you're doomed to become that.
Right.
So I think we need to have more, at the elementary, junior high school level, programs and, doctors willing to reach out and say, hey, look at what I've done. Look where I started. Look what you could be.
Right.
You can be more than your current grades. You can be more than your current family situation.
Yeah.
You can be more than what that teacher is telling you that you aren't.
Absolutely.
You can be more than LeBron, who's doing wonderful things himself. You can be more than even Barack Obama.
Yeah.
So all the familiar faces they need to see that they can identify with. They're not going to identify with, what they see in mainstream media in terms of what a doctor is. They're
Right.
not going to identify necessarily with even other black males who may not be doing professional or outstanding things. So
Right.
being out in the community is very important, and having that outreach to show them that, hey, you're more than what you're told you are.
Definitely, man. I can't really say it any better, but I think exactly what you're saying is dead on. I mean, I think people I love what Max and Pierre, and I can't remember the other gentleman's name, who's make up the Pulse of Perseverance, but it's like their goal is to change the narrative, and I love that.
Correct.
Because especially what's been happening in the media over the course of the last several years with, the police brutality and things like that. I think it's just so crucial and important to do whatever we can to change the perception of what a young black man is in society, and also, like you said, be a source of encouragement to those who may think their circumstances are greater than they are and weighing them down. So,
it doesn't have to be formal.
Yeah.
I just want to stress that as well. It could be just in any passing conversation, whether it's at church, whether it's me randomly speaking to some of the other staff at the hospital, whether it's me having, which often happens, black patients and their family in the room, and kind of the surprise they have when they see me in the room.
Right.
Being able to talk to, whether it's their child in the room, their cousin in the room, maybe a young, black, guy or girl, and that they see me and I see the surprise in their eyes when they see a black doctor. So it can be in passing. It's not necessarily a formal thing that you have to do. Any witness or testimony you can give in any circumstance can change a person's life.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what we've said the last few times we've done this particular type of show, where we're kind of spotlighting or featuring or talking about this thing, is that really any touch point is an opportunity. And we all, whether we know it or not, we all have our circles of influence where we can make a difference. And I think that's the
impact
key.
can happen in 30 seconds of conversation.
That's it, man. Appreciate you coming on, man.
Of course. Yeah.
Any final parting thoughts before we let the people go?
Not so much. I'm just happy to, I guess, finally be here. I know you've been doing this for a minute, so I'm happy to put my little 2 cents in, and any influence I can be in a positive factor, I'm happy to be.
Love it. Well, we appreciate you guys tuning in. As always, tune in every week. This is actually going to run next week. So again, Merry Christmas to all you guys. Happy New Year.
Merry Christmas.
And we will see you on the other side of things. Take care.
All right. Good night.
Bye-bye. Dope.
All right. Cool.
Thank you, sir.